All right, Money Week. So, we talked about reserve banking. That's bad. Probably get away with that. Uh, then we talked about the difference between money and currency, how money is a store of value, and how if you have your currency indexed to an actual real life physical thing, there's lots of benefits to that. But there's actually a different method than indexing to reality that we could do. And this is the approach of some cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, where what you do is instead of acting like reality, try to improve upon reality, right? I mean, anytime you don't do something that's based in reality, hopefully it's better, right? And so this is the concept of a deflationary currency. And so the way Bitcoin does it is right now it's not a deflationary currency. Anytime someone mines Bitcoin, that means that they allow a transaction to go through. So kind of like how you swipe your credit card and then at the end of the day, the business says, "Hey, banks, give me money." And so, the bank holds on to your money in the meantime and doesn't let you do anything with it. But at the end of the day, that's when it actually leaves your account, right? It's not when you swipe your credit card. It's when, at the end of the day, the business you swiped your credit card at clears their accounts. So it pretty much works that way. But for Bitcoin, it's every 10 minutes instead of every day. And that's pretty much how it goes. And every 10 minutes, a little bit of currency is injected into the system to pay the person who ran that transaction. But eventually, that inflation will half and half and half until there's nothing left. And at that point, it'll be purely transaction cost based. And so if a transaction goes through and used for, 1 Bitcoin, well, then maybe you get 1% of that, something like that. But at that point, Bitcoin will not inflate ever again. There will be no more Bitcoins created ever. And that means that the chance for inflation is very much probably not going to happen. But deflation, the opposite, where there's less currency in the system, well, if someone forgets their Bitcoin account number, well, those Bitcoins are gone forever. No one's ever going to find them again because you can't unlock it. And so, they're gone. And then, over time, accounts will be lost. Coins here and there will be lost. And so you'll start to deflate. And the amount of Bitcoin in the world will get smaller and smaller and smaller. The thing is, since it's just a number, and Bitcoin's just a number, you can send over one, quadrillionth of a Bitcoin to someone. A minuscule, tiny, tiny bit. So you can keep cutting it in half and half and half and half and half forever. So there's no issue that at any point Bitcoin will lose its value just because it's deflating. It's just that the prices will go down over time. And that's a very interesting concept, isn't it? Because we've talked about inflation, where there's more currency in the system. And if there's more currency in the system, then prices go up. But what happens when over time there's less currency in the system? Then as more people join the network, start using their own Bitcoins, more people are born, they start working and earning Bitcoin presumably, well, then the prices are going to go down. Because everyone's just so desperate to get that Bitcoin, they're going to lower the prices, lower the prices, lower the prices. and the prices go down over time as there's more people using Bitcoin or just less Bitcoin to go around. Those prices go down. Now that is a very interesting concept because right now, one of the big problems with money is interest. That if you have money, you have your dollars, right? What you want to do with it is you feel compelled to invest it, to make it work for you, to make it grow. Because if it's just sitting there doing nothing, well, with an inflationary currency, you're losing money. You're losing out by saving it. But with a deflationary currency, you hold on to it, and you hold on to it for 10 years. Maybe you can buy 10% more than you could before. Maybe you can buy twice as much. If it's deflating and the prices are going down over time, then the incentive isn't to spend as soon as you can, but rather to hold on to it for as long as possible. Now, the people who spend it for something real, they're probably not punished that much, right? Because you get to have a house in the meantime, you get to have a car in the meantime, you get to have all this benefit in the meantime. But if you didn't really need it, well, maybe you would be better off financially not spending that money at all. And that is the interesting thing about deflation. Is the incentive is to not spend money. And so, people who are afraid of deflation, who like inflation, what they're afraid of is that the economy will come to a grinding halt. That as people are more and more frugal, where they're like, I could spend money, or I could save it, and in the future, when things get even less expensive, I could get more stuff, right? Well, they're afraid that if no one's buying anything, then nothing gets made. The flaw I see in their logic is that out of all of the stuff that's currently being made, pretty much all of it should be made. But I don't think anyone really believes that. There's a lot of stuff that gets made and gets immediately thrown out because it was a failed venture. No one actually wanted it. Because the business, well, it was founded on an idea that wasn't that great. People didn't want the product, and so scrap it. Throw it up on the dollar store, throw it in the garbage, whatever. But if that's what's currently happening, then if we slowed things down and the only way you would run a business is if you were guaranteed a profit, well, then you would be much more careful, and you would only produce enough to keep people satisfied, not so much as to feel excessive like it is today. And so, what happens if people aren't producing that much? Well then, what happens is prices go up. Because if you want a computer, but only half as many computers are being made, well then, you probably have to pay more for that computer. And this is the balancing act. That as deflation exists, in a world where deflation is the motivating factor for how people act, they are incentivized to make the bare minimum for themselves, and to any degree where they would like more, well then, they're going to have to go after a more limited set of things. So prices go down because there's less currency to go around. But prices go up because people are producing less. And if the goal is production, this is not a good thing. But if the goal is a happy life, then what's wrong with that? Do you really need to have so much lettuce that tons and tons of it get thrown out? Or maybe you're happy with, you have your salad and you're like, oh, well, we ran out of lettuce. Maybe we're going to do broccoli, or maybe we're going to do, I don't know, dandelion greens or some other thing. You can grow your own lettuce if you ever wanted to. No one's stopping you. And so maybe that becomes much more plausible, much more motivating. Where you say, well, I could pay, say $10 for a bunch of lettuce. Or I could pay $10 for lettuce seeds and grow way more lettuce. So instead of lettuce for a month, I have lettuce for a year or 2 years. Or maybe enough, if I keep re-sowing those seeds, maybe enough forever. Well then, that's a different calculation. And then what happens is, people are encouraged to be more independent. You can see how this appeals to me as a distributist, right? I want everyone to be independent and be able to handle their own problems, have a good life on their own effort, by their own merit. Not because some high up person in power said, I like you, so therefore you get XYZ. No, instead, everyone's working to improve their own life, doing stuff by themselves, and then things get better for themselves. That's very appealing. And so while a deflationary currency, to my knowledge, hasn't really been tried in earnest, the experiment with Bitcoin, as we get closer and closer to that deflationary state, gets pretty interesting. Maybe we'll see something cool. Maybe it'll be a model worth pursuing. The issue with things that haven't really been tried before is you don't know what will happen. Not really. And so what I'm saying right now is kind of speculation. There's no proof or evidence for it because there's no proof or evidence to the contrary either. It's just speculation. But it makes sense. And that's how markets as we know them today would handle the situation. It's just, are our models wrong? Maybe. But the best part about having this deflationary currency that says, save your money as much as possible. Not only does it discourage spending just for the sake of having stuff, but it also, in a way, discourages investments and interest. Because if you are going to invest in something, lend money to someone else, then for one, you're risking not only the money, the initial investment, but you're also risking all of the increased deflationary value you would have gained. So the interest rate would have to be even higher. And when interest rates are higher, well, then what has to happen is interest rate is higher. And so there's a discouragement there. And by interest rate, I'm really talking about the effective increase, because if you have one Bitcoin today versus one Bitcoin 10 years from now, the one Bitcoin 10 years from now is more valuable by a lot. But the one Bitcoin today is equivalent. All you have to do is keep it. And so those interest rates, they don't actually get high numbers, right? Like a 0.5% interest rate is probably good if you're in a deflationary system, because then you just give back what you got plus, tiny little bit. And then it's like compounding interest, because not only did you get the 1%, the one Bitcoin 10 years from now, you got 1.05. Ooh, really good. Well, that was 5%. Whatever. You know what I mean. That you get that increase over time, mostly from the deflationary nature of the currency and less so from the interest. And so the idea that you would lend money to someone, it becomes more risky, because you could earn a really good interest rate effectively by doing nothing, because that one Bitcoin in 10 years gets you 10 times as much stuff, let's say, or 2 times as much stuff. So you can just wait 10 years and buy twice as much, or you can risk an investment and maybe it'll pan out and maybe you will be able to do maybe 3 times as much in 10 years. But is that difference really worth the risk? For a lot of people, no. For most people, no. And so there will be less people that make investments and collect interest. And to a lot of people, that sounds bad. But you gotta think about what I said about the evils of money in terms of interest. When you lend money for someone to buy something they cannot afford, and that becomes a system, they borrowed money. And so the person who also wants it also needs to borrow money. And then it's a race to who can borrow more. This is what's happened with the housing market. This is what has happened with education, with colleges. This is what has happened in health insurance. It's a little bit different, but same concept. It's not interest that you see, it's the interest between the healthcare, health insurance and the healthcare provider, and there's all kinds of stuff going on there. But anyway, whenever there is interest, whenever money is being lent to someone, there's this tendency for competition, where if you lend me money to go to school, well, then the other guy will want to be lent money to go to school. And then everyone gets lent money to go to school. And then they get lent more money and more money and more money. And so, what'll happen is one of two things. And like I say, this has never really been tried in reality, in earnest. So we'll see what happens. But one of two things will happen. Either there will be a group of people that lend out money, and the people they lend it out to just won't be able to pay them back. And so they will never get it back. And that'll be just how it is. And then they'll stop lending out money. And as they stop lending out money, prices will have to fall because people can't borrow it anymore. And yes, it's true, some prices won't fall. Just because you're allowed to, have a car loan doesn't mean that the cars are inherently more expensive. The expensive cars have always been about as expensive as they are. That hasn't changed. The cheaper cars, yeah, they've gotten a little bit more expensive, but some of that's inflation. But as the loans go away, we'll find out how much of this stuff is real. How much, of the housing value has just been pushed up and propped up because people are allowed to borrow for mortgages. And we'll see how much of it is a lie, where it's just, no, it costs this much to build a house, and so it costs, 5%, 10% more than that to buy a house. Because, the person who makes the house with all the effort and all of the, labor and all that stuff, well, they'll make a little bit of a profit, and then that's the price for the house. And those margins will get slimmer and slimmer because people aren't going at it with that mindset of investing. They're going at it with the mindset of, just give me that money back plus any amount, and that'll be a profit. And in 10 years, I'll be swimming in it, right? And so it'll be interesting if that happens, or if the nightmare scenario happens. And what happens is, because these interest rates are just so low that it's not worth investing anymore, people just stop having access to those things. And the prices can't go down because they're real, that it costs this much to manufacture a car, and no matter how much you don't have competition, well, it costs that much. If you want a car, it costs that much. You have a loan or you don't have a loan, it costs that much. That might be true. And so that's the fear. Is if you can't lend money with interest, then maybe people will not lend money at all. And if that happens, how will people afford these luxuries? And maybe what'll happen is we just won't have as many. And maybe that will be bad, and maybe that'll be freeing. We don't know. Because a lot of these luxuries we've not been without. A lot of these luxuries we've just grown up with and been accustomed to. And maybe, in the same way that silencing your phone for a day and not constantly checking it actually has benefits to your mental health, well, maybe it's the same way with cars. Maybe if we live a life where we don't need a car, we're actually living a better life. Maybe it's the case that cars are reasonably affordable and so it's not a big deal. There's lots of maybes here. But you can see why it's interesting. Because if it did work out well, and if we had a deflationary currency and all you had to do was provide enough value out there into the world that you got some money, then you just save it. And then, you made enough money to pay for your expenses, and, you saved maybe 10%. Well, then, in 10 years, that 10% becomes, 20% of your expenses, because your expenses went down from deflation. Maybe it's 50%. And so, effectively, it's super easy to save for retirement, and everyone has an easier time in becoming wealthier. Because, hey, that's what money does. at least in a deflationary economy. So, I just wanted to throw that idea out there because that's something a lot of people don't think about. And like I said, it's not been tried. We don't know what will happen. It could be the case that it ends up very, very badly. It could be the case that all of the older people who made money never spend it, and then all the younger people who need money can't get it. And so, money's worthless because the people who need it don't have it, and the people who have it don't need it. So it could be that. But that leads to another question. If that were to happen, would we even need money anymore? And that's something. That's also an interesting idea. And I think we'll get into that one next time.